Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the weekly MMA Cycles Market Update. Today is Wednesday, June 4th, 2025. I'm Gianni Di Poce, your host, and we're seeing stocks pretty much stall out here near their recent highs. That's not exactly the worst signal in the world, but we do have to look forward to Venus ingressing into the sign of Taurus, the sign that she rules on Friday. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on in the Dow and talk about why I think Venus ingressing into Taurus could be especially important for markets near term. Well, if you were paying attention to the headlines this morning, we finally saw some weakness in the labor market creep in the economy. The ADP employment report was one of the worst misses over the last few years, highlighting that indeed some of the economic policy changes we are seeing are having an impact on the way the economy is working. Now, many people have been talking about tariffs from the standpoint of inflation, but I think the bigger threat right now has to do with unemployment. And the reason why is because we now have Saturn conjunct Neptune in the sign of Aries. It's not an exact conjunction, but we are within orb. And in last week's free weekly column, which Ray asked me to write, and I shared, you can see that in the on www.mmacycles.com. I talked about how historically Neptune in fire signs has been inflationary, but we could be in this Goldilocks scenario over the next 12 to 18 months where the inflationary pressures of Neptune and Aries are contained, basically because Saturn is putting a lid on the inflationary nature of Neptune. So once that conjunction moves out of orb and Saturn separates, gets past Neptune and separates it, pretty much a year from now, then we may start to see inflation creep back into the picture. But near term, Venus going into Taurus, we've been talking about that from a crypto standpoint, could be a tailwind for stocks. In the near term, we continue to see the NASDAQ outperform to the upside. Perhaps more importantly, semiconductor names continue to lead, outperform the market to the upside, which is not a bearish signal. Now, in about a month from now, on July 7th, we are going to have Uranus move into the sign of Gemini, and it's going to be moving into orb of a trine to Pluto in Aquarius. Well, there's been a lot of Plutonian and Aquarius themes recently. News on the Palantir front, which is a big tech company that basically is making a database of Americans. Obviously, we know that there's been data collection going on for quite a long time. But the point I'm making on that is it's a different different type, kind of like a Skynet system, if you're familiar with that subject. So we see those themes playing out. And again, Uranus trine Pluto, not necessarily the worst aspect for tech names. Now, next week on June 9th, we also have Jupiter going into the sign of Cancer. On the same day, Venus is going to square Pluto. And I'm keeping an eye on this, particularly when it comes to bond markets and interest rates. We're sticking with our forecast that Jupiter in Cancer is going to be easing and accommodative monetary policy from the Fed. If you think about Jupiter as stimulus, Saturn as contraction, Saturn's in its fall in the sign of Aries. So when you have a stimulus planet exalted and a contractionary planet weakened, that does speak to me, at least to be very accommodative. Plus, Venus square Pluto, we could see some shifts in verbiage from the Fed sooner than later. And mark my words when I say that the recent data on the employment front, on the labor front today, is the first domino to drop. If this Friday's jobs report comes in weak, the same day that Venus goes into Taurus, it could mean the beginning of a shift in the rhetoric, in the verbiage coming from the central bank. Let's also remember that President Trump is set to have a phone call with the leader of China, Xi Jinping, and Venus in Taurus. Not bad for making some sort of agreements that may actually last on the trade front. So let's try to keep an open mind, follow the cycles, follow the geocosmics, follow the price action because they are pointing to some good things. Gold and silver, had a really strong start to the week, pulled back a little bit here. We obviously have that Jupiter-Neptune square coming up on June 18th, which is going to be the next Fed meeting. Maybe that is the next time the Fed says, hey, we're open to rate cuts. Keep in mind that most of the other central banks around the world have been easing, save for the Bank of Japan. And so we could see a blow off top going into that aspect. Crude oil, seeing some selling again. And, it may take until Saturn retrogrades back into the sign of Pisces later this year for the bottom to form in crude oil. But as long as crude oil is falling, that does reinforce the idea that interest rates could come down. And of course, let's talk about what's happening in Bitcoin, because here in Bitcoin, we have some sideways action and a retest of former resistance turn support. And, I've been talking about this Venus and Taurus setup for Bitcoin specifically because we often see it correspond to 20% or greater moves. So seeing prices hang out on technical support here is really a beautiful sight to behold from a charting standpoint, because when you know the geocosmics, we're leaving the door open for a 20% rally higher, which could take you, north of 125 at least. So that's looking strong. Ethereum also is looking very solid here, consolidating its gains, actually showing a little bit more technical strength than Bitcoin. So that's what's happening in this market right now. I appreciate you tuning in. A couple of quick announcements. I do want to make you all aware of the MMA Midyear webinar that's going to take place on June 15th, the Sunday. So all the details can be found at MMACycles.com. We are going to have the monthly cycles report published shortly after on the 16th and the 17th, our flagship report. And in the meantime, we did kick off the financial astrology introductory course, the basics of financial astrology, last weekend, hosted by Merriman and myself. It was a very good class, and we're going to be starting with week 2 here this Saturday. So if you didn't get a chance to join us last Saturday, we kept it very simple, just introduced planetary topics. This week's lesson, we're going to be going into the various signs and how they rule different parts of the economy. You can still join us and view last week's recording. So don't wait, don't hesitate, because we have about 80 people in the class. It's been a very good turnout, very vibrant discussion, very lively discussion, great questions, people from all over the world. And of course, the Merriman Market Timing Academy, from which we're only holding 50 seats. And we're about 20 people filled already, and the special rate to join us, the early bird discount, does expire on July 1st. So you only have a few weeks left to join us. If you have any questions, send us an email, customerservice@MMAcycles.com. That's all for this week, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button. We'll be back next week. Same time, same place. Take care now.